What's up, college football addicts? Now, we have recently learned of some breaking news in regards to the North Carolina Tar Heels and their potential future in the ACC. To make matters even worse, this is all coming during ACC's summer meetings in Florida. So the timing of these bombshell announcements were, in my opinion, very intentional. They were thought out. They were well coordinated. But there is a ton of stuff to unpack here, including an absolutely epic, game-changing revelation that the major media is completely missing about this situation. It directly involves Florida State and Clemson. So all you ACC fans out there, you may want to stick around for this one, because we're going to break it all down for you today here on College Football Addiction. Before we get rolling, thank you as always for joining us. Very happy to have you here. If you're an FSU, Clemson, North Carolina, or fan of any ACC team, or just like conference realignment, hope you'd consider subscribing to the channel and letting us know that you enjoy our content. Now, here on the channel, I've been following conference realignment pretty closely for over a year. And I appreciate those of you who have been with us from the beginning and the newbies here to the channel. But all that aside, let's go ahead and get rolling. Let's do a quick rundown of everything that's led up to this pressure-packed moment. For those of you who missed it or are unfamiliar, several weeks ago, the North Carolina AD, Bubba Cunningham, came out with a statement publicly supporting the ACC. He did an interview with Inside Carolina, and he said, if Florida State thinks that they have a greater value than our league and they want to leave, wouldn't we ask to share in some of the upside of that greater value? He said, so I'm not sure that $500 million is going to be enough. Maybe it's $600 or $700 million to get out of the league. I don't know. He went on to say, I think our obligation to the ACC is to be the best partner with our conference that we can possibly be. I also think that what we have to look at is what is in the best interest of the university today and going forward, and I think that you can do both. Well, immediately after Cunningham publicly shared those thoughts, North Carolina Board of Trustees Chair John Pryor came out and crushed Cunningham in an interview with, again, Inside Carolina. North Carolina Board of Trustees John Pryor responded and very publicly disagreed with the AD Cunningham's takes, calling Cunningham's comments a potential conflict. Now, Pryor went on to throw more grenades at Cunningham, saying, and it's something that is disturbing based on some of the comments he's made recently, which seem to support the ACC at the expense of Carolina. That's a bad look. He said, I think we will all recognize that change is hard, but sometimes change is exactly what's needed. We all have to fight the comfort of complacency. And I think that now is the time to be very open to pursuing all options, including those beyond remaining in the ACC. Pryor went on to lob many more grenades during his interview. He said the addition of 2 schools from California and a school from Texas to the Atlantic Coast Conference has the additional burden of making it even harder. It effectively creates a further burden on those schools that are not feeling well served by the conference, by the commissioner. By adding those 3 schools, you make it harder to do things like, say, dissolve the conference. Pryor went on to say the conference is not acting as if it is best representing the interests of member schools, including the top tier of those schools, Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina. Now, I've told you guys this before, but I'll repeat it for you again, especially for those Tar Heel fans. There is literally no other way to interpret what went down. The chairman of your board of trustees went after your AD and the new members of the conference's jugulars. And again, just to reiterate, all those comments were just discussed between Cunningham and Pryor from just a few weeks ago. And we're just about to get to that breaking news that we promised you earlier. But one more quick thing. We can't forget about what went down with the North Carolina Board of Governors a few weeks ago, who decided to throw their hat into the ring and take over any veto power for conference realignment moves for North Carolina and North Carolina State. things then started to get really interesting because ESPN's David Hale came out and dropped a huge update. He said that there were certainly some voices in North Carolina who wanted to move forward with a lawsuit, though that was not the prevailing viewpoint, and saying that UNC has the luxury of hanging back and knowing that they'll have a soft landing eventually. Finally, it's also worth mentioning that it is thought that North Carolina would be a take for both the Big 10 and the SEC, and both would be happy to have UNC. So we fast forward to today. Recently, WRAL's Brian Murphy dropped several new bombshell stories. The first was in regards to UNC Board of Trustees giving a okay for a committee to initiate a full audit of their athletics department. Now, per Murphy, this involves talks of budget deficits, missed meetings, cost cutting, changes to college athletics, and conference affiliation. But all this revelation was just the tip of the iceberg. Shortly after that, Murray directly quoted a UNC trustee, that's Dave Bullock, in regards to these audits, who joined prayer, becoming the second major trustee to fire warning shots. I quote this: "A lot of it is due to the revenue or lack thereof of revenue that we're not receiving from the ACC deal." The ACC distributes about $40 million per school to its member institutions, but the SEC and the Big 10 are projected to distribute up to $70 million in coming years due to growing media rights agreements. The two leagues will receive more money than the ACC each year of the new college football playoff as well. Bullock went on to say it is not something you can just change with the snap of a finger. He said it's something we've got to be cognizant of. We can't sit back and just cross our fingers and pray for pennies from heaven and think that everything is just going to work out. We have to actively pursue what's in the best interest of Carolina athletics. Now, Florida State and Clemson have sued the ACC, seeking to lessen their fees and penalties for leaving the league. Bullock said he wants UNC to join a higher revenue league. And quoting here, "I am advocating for that," he said. "That's what we need to do. We need to do everything we can to get there, or the alternative is the ACC is going to have to reconstruct itself." He said, "I think all options are on the table." So quickly to rehash, we have North Carolina's Board of Trustees chair and another North Carolina trustee and former chair saying the quiet part out loud about the ACC. And during the middle of the ACC's meetings, nonetheless. You might recall last year it was during the media days when the talk of the Magnificent Seven was leaked. It seems like every time the conference has a major event, you see some big news come out. As the conference is taking major shots across the bow in 2 consecutive years when it's supposed to be a time of celebration for the conference, a time of growth for the conference. So I suspect some of you guys might be like me and a little curious about what North Carolina's AD, Bubba Cunningham, thought about these new bombshells. Well, lucky for us, we didn't have to wait very long to find out. ESPN's Brandon Marcello asked Cunningham his thoughts. And like the coward that he has proven to be, he had no comment on the report from WRAL. In fact, he says he hadn't read it and added that he'll be at the Board of Trustees meeting on Thursday. So what does all this mean and why should you care? Well, let's spell it all out for you. We're going to get to our epic game-changing revelation in a moment, but first you do need to understand that what we are seeing at North Carolina is basically a season of Game of Thrones unfolding in real time in front of the national media. There is a huge, epic fight going on in North Carolina behind the scenes, where multiple Board of Trustee members, including the chair, are absolutely convinced that North Carolina should leave the ACC. And that group believes the numbers are too damning and too impossible to reconcile. And there's nothing the ACC is going to be able to do to correct it. Now, on the other hand, you have a small handful of others at UNC, including longtime ACC good old boys like Bubba Cunningham, who would be willing to keep North Carolina in the ACC, whether it's for tradition's sake or whatever the reason, even if it meant losing money and inevitably becoming uncompetitive. And these two sides are in a knockdown, drag-out brawl. There is a lot of poison coming from both sides, but it's not just money what's at stake here. As we've recently learned, sources inside North Carolina believe basketball would be a huge threat. From Chair Prayer and Trustees Bullock's perspective, there are basically some thoughts and there are some reasons to be terrified that what has played out in football will eventually also play out in hoops, with the SEC and the Big 10 being able to throw far more resources at basketball than any other conference can. And when you look at the numbers, they are absolutely correct. I know it feels like basketball is well represented between all conferences and 64 teams get in, so anyone can win, right? But when you have conferences making 2 to 2.5 times more than other conferences, the SEC and the Big 10 will eventually turn those extra resources towards basketball and set minimum requirements for all their teams to spend money on hoops. And those requirements are going to be far higher than what teams outside of those conferences are going to be able to pay. And the result of that will be just what it is with football. The vast majority of top-tier players will go to those conferences. Teams like UConn, teams in the ACC, teams in the Big 12 are going to be left behind. And it's going to happen far quicker than people realize because the SEC and the Big 10 needed to complete their goal of taking over football entirely before they devote time, attention, and resources to hoops. As far as the game changer that we promised, I have learned that behind closed doors, there is a huge fight between numerous ACC teams. While several of the smaller schools are trying to cut a deal for extra revenue sharing in order to retain North Carolina, they are making the pitch to UNC that they will get the vast majority of the Florida State and Clemson settlement money. They'll also get the vast majority of the future SMU, Cal, and Stanford money if they just agree to stay. The prevailing thought is that keeping North Carolina would be the lifeboat for extending the ACC deal beyond 2027. Now, the flip side of that is that there are several mid-tier schools like Miami, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh, who likely have decent landing spots who are unwilling to sign off on paying North Carolina tons of money just to stay. To make matters worse, the North Carolina Board of Trustees believe that even if they stayed and even if the ACC implemented extreme revenue sharing, it still would not come close to offsetting the gap between UNC and the SEC and the Big 10, especially with how much ESPN will almost certainly lower the ACC payout once Florida State and Clemson leave. Now, for the accountants in the room that understand, the ACC is completely screwed. Everyone else is really just sentimental. And the brutal reality of the numbers are going to once again play out, just like they did with the Pac-12. So now that you are fully caught up and you understand the fireworks going on in North Carolina, there is a bit of an issue. You may have missed this discussion that we recently had about how Clemson fits into all of this and where we expect them to land. So do me a favor right now and click the video on the screen to get caught up and learn more about the Clemson Tigers.